What is up, guys? How's it going? I wanted to show how you can make the attributes extension work in Able and make it work pretty good. It's a very lightweight plugin that is pretty simple but powerful, and I don't personally use it, but it's pretty cool, and I know that some people could find it useful. So the first thing is that on the marketplace, it doesn't actually work for 4.26, but it is up to date for 4.26 on the GitHub. So if you come over to their GitHub, here's the page, by the way. And if you go into the description, you can find documentation, which is very good. You should always read through that. There are specifics to this that, even though it's very simple, you should still know. And also there's a GitHub. So if you come over here, you'll see, yeah, we have documentation. It tells you about the types of attributes. There's a float and an int, how to create them, but I'll show you that in a second. And then how modifiers work better than I'm going to explain. So you should have a quick read through here. On the GitHub, you'll find that the releases are from like 2019, which is super not useful. But if you come up to the code and download the zip, the actual zipped version that hasn't been built is updated for 4.26. So yeah, you download the zip and then you come into your documents and you drop it into your project inside a plugins folder. As you see here, I've got attributes extension main. And then when you start up the project, it's going to tell you that it's out of date and can it rebuild? And you just say yes, and it should rebuild. If it doesn't rebuild, I suggest opening up a clear project, building it in there, and then when it's built, it should just copy paste into your other projects. Cool. So that's getting it installed, which is a bit of a pain, but there you go. So what can we actually do with it? Well, by default, it does a few things. So by default, you create a variable by coming into here and just saying attr, and then we got float attribute and int flat attribute. So if I do this one, and we'll just, you would name it however you want. So we'll just say damage, and then you have all these things you can do to it. So for now, we'll just talk about add and removing modifiers, because that's like the main thing. So I could do add modifier. We'll split that off, and I can change the base multiplier, the last multiplier, or the modifier increment. So increment is adding a flat value. If you have a value of 100, it's going to give you a value of 110 if you add 10, right? If I add 10, I get 110. If I modify the base multiplier by 2, and I have a value of 100, I'm going to get 200. If I do this all together, I'll get 210. So yeah, if I do this and I do the last multiplier, which is kind of like a more multiplier, if you ever play PoE, you'll get 420, which I did not do on purpose, but there we go. Cool. So this one takes into account all the math before it, whereas these two are kind of like independent. So yeah, something to bear in mind, and it's in the documentation. That's why I recommend you read it. So there's an issue with this if you want to use Able, like me and most people that I post to do. If you want to make a task in Able and you want to have a variable attribute, well, you can't, because this is a variable in itself. So we need to find a way to categorize it and search for it and get the correct value for what we want. So what I went and did was I made a couple of little things. We have I called this stat name for some reason. It should be attribute name. But in here, it's just a list of enums. I have health, damage, and crit, just to like test things out. I have an add remove enum just so we can do something later. You'll see that. And then I made an actor component. And in here, I'm doing a few things. So ignore this for now. All you need to know is that I have 3 variables here. I have one that's a map. This doesn't need to exist. You could make this a data asset or a data table. And as long as you loop through them and they have the same values, you'll be fine. So don't worry about it being a map. You can do whatever you want with it, because it's just used to initialize our base values. So in this case, I have this, and it gives me 100 damage and 1000 health. I'm looping through the keys, and then I'm splitting them apart. So I'm putting them into this array of stat names, or attribute names is what it should be called. And then I'm getting an array of float attributes. And I'm basically saying, right, yep, this list I have, I just want you to go through, add the enum, and then add the value. And what you'll end up with is two arrays side by side that you can, replicate perfectly fine, and they'll have parroted indexes or indices. I don't know. And yeah, so if you call on index 3 and that's your life value, we know that index 3 of the value is always going to be your life value because we've created them that way. So with bearing that in mind, we now have two arrays that are in sync, and we can now query them, and that's going to make things a little bit easier because we're going to get our attribute. We have a function, get attribute. It's a pure function, and we're going to find that enum. This makes it really easy to find stuff. So I'm going to find my health. I just have the stat name in here on my get attribute. Health, damage, crit, whatever you want. And we're going to do a find inside the attribute name. And then that's going to give us the index back, which we can then get the attribute value from. And we're going to output that. So what do we get with that? We get something like this. So yeah, I can get my attribute of whatever I want. And then I can add a modifier. So if I press Z, I should get a value of 100, I think. 100. Okay. Now, the add modifier isn't doing anything, right? Because I shouldn't be getting 100, actually. I have damage of 100, and this is a base multiplier of 10, so I should be getting 1,000, but I'm not. And I think it's because functions return copies of structures and not references, I think. So this add modifier isn't going back and applying to the array, which is kind of a pain. But there are ways around it. All we need to make sure that we're doing is creating or doing the modification inside the attribute extension blueprint, or component rather. So I made this modify attribute function, and I in here call my variables. I have my attribute name and my attribute value, and we're just going to do some searching again. So if you're not aware, this is the same as this. You can do get attribute, for example, and you'll have get attribute, and this is from that, and you can do get modifier, and this is that. Really useful for keeping things tidy. So I'm just going to plug that back in. And this is the same with these as well. Modify category, and add remove. And we're using the add remove for a switch. So this is one single function that will both add and remove based on their enum. And then we're just putting their add modifier with those values in, and the remove modifier with those values in. So if we come back in now, and you'll see, I actually have this already set up. So I can add damage at a base multiplier of 10. And then we'll get that damage value that after we've changed it, and we'll print it out. So if I press X, you can see it's 1100, 2100, 3100. This is working correctly, right? It's a 100 base value times by 10 added on top every time I press it. Cool. So yeah, we have a working stat system effectively. It's pretty simple, but of course, like I said, you need to go in, find what you want, what you need from it, and then you can extend it and do what you want with it. So why is this more useful for something like Able? Well, Able works with like tasks and things, right? Which is all very parameter based, and I'm sure many other things do as well. So it's not just for Able, but what I've been doing is I have my task have a variable like the stat name, health, damage, crit, and then from there I'm just going to plug that into my modify attribute. So I'm going to get owner, get my third person character, get that modify attribute function I just made, and just plug my attribute in, and also my modifier. So when I'm in the task, when the task opens up in Able, I just have those parameters there, and it will do what I want with it. On task start, you'll see it's the exact same thing, but I've got add, and on task end, it's remove. So this task will change a value while that task exists, and then when it ends, it will change it back. So good for like having a crit window in ability, or this ability has 10% extra crit by default. You could put that as a task inside, right? So yeah, there's lots you can do with this. If we look at the ability, you can see on my ability start, I can cast the owner, get the character, and then I can get an attribute like damage, and I'm printing it out. But of course, this is the exact same thing that you would do in override damage for actor, for example. So you would, do something like this. Output value, there you go. And yeah, now you have your damage stat is now changing the damage of your ability. Obviously, this is very simple. You'd probably want to do different math in here, but that's the general idea. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, with a little bit of work, the attribute extension should be pretty good. It's obviously not the most fantastically built thing. It's not gonna make Path of Exile or anything. But for majority of games that just need a few simple stats and stuff, yeah, it's absolutely more than enough with a little bit of work. So yeah, I apologize, it was pretty quick and brief, but hopefully that's helped someone at least work with the attribute extension. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. I'll speak to you next time.